Children of narcissists, what was the moment you finally saw through the manipulation? My parents prided themselves on running a charity organization, except they didn't do any work, because most of it was left to me and my older sister Caroline. For my 7th birthday, no one even celebrated. Instead, my 13-year-old sister Caroline taught me how to organize leaflets and distribute them to the public. By this point, Caroline was working so hard for my parents that she didn't even have time to go to school more than twice a week. And at first, the principal was like, what the F? But when he heard it was to help with the charity organization, he let it slide. And I was next in line. Together, me and Caroline were working 50 hours a week. And since I was, in my parents' words, too dumb to do anything yet, I mainly just watched Caroline while trying to memorize everything. This was all while our parents did as minimal work as possible. They'd simply show up to the photo shoots, sign off on documents, and their favorite pastime of all, brag about owning a charitable organization, nonprofit, their 2 favorite words. But what they failed to mention was that they were the heirs of my millionaire granddad's will, and only 2% of it was put into the charity, while the rest was poured into their pompous lifestyles. Designer handbags, spontaneous trips to Greece, a home cinema. It honestly amazed me how dumb some people were, how they never found it sus that my parents refused to ever host anything at the house, how my mom had 3 different car keys on her keyring, and whenever I asked to take a break, my parents would be sure to punish me. It wasn't like they ever hit us or anything, but if I ever tried to sleep in by an extra half an hour on the weekend, or collapsed to the wooden floor in the living room out of exhaustion, she would take out her cell phone and start filming me. If you could see yourself right now, maybe you'd finally realize how pathetic you really are, she'd say. And sometimes she'd even spit on me. Meanwhile, my dad's role was to play good cop, but not towards me. It was towards Caroline, because sometimes she'd try to comfort me, but my dad would always shove her off of me. No need to comfort your piece of shot sister. Laziness and selfishness should never be rewarded. And because of his meticulous choice of phrasing, it always worked. Eventually, I learned exactly what my parents expected and did it without complaint, no matter how sleazy or draining their methods were. To this day, that working era is probably my favorite memory from childhood, because every day my parents would cook me and Caroline our favorite meals. Caroline was allowed to be nice to me again, and I actually felt like I had a sister. And on my 10th birthday, I finally got my day off. Our parents said I deserved it, and they let me just chill in the home cinema with a slice of fresh strawberry cheesecake from the Cheesecake Factory. I was so exhausted that I ended up sleeping for almost 18 hours that day. Caroline even came in and kissed me on the forehead before putting a blanket over me. The next morning when I woke up, I was completely foggy-headed and could barely move my body, because that day of rest was a wake-up call for how burnt out I really was. But I knew if I told them, then all hell would break loose. So I simply neglected my tasks, slept like a normal kid, went to school 5 days a week, and I guess they noticed because they started feeding me the cheapest frozen food from the local Walmart. My meals consisted of peanut butter, grape jelly sandwiches, and Hot Pockets. Meanwhile, Caroline was getting fed gourmet meat and vegetables from an extremely expensive farmer's market. But I didn't care anymore, because all my brain wanted to do was rest. By this point, Caroline was 16 years old. Even though she was barely going to school, she was still smart because the stuff my parents had her doing was at a college level of knowledge. But that was just about all she had going for her, because she was extremely unhealthy. 30 pounds underweight, had eye bags that dragged down her entire face, and was crying all the time. No one cared, because all that mattered was that she was keeping the business running. At night while our parents rested, I'd beg her to sleep a little longer, to put less pressure on herself. But my parents had done such a good job at indoctrination that she'd always reply with the same thing. I'm not a selfish bitch like you. I actually want to make a difference. Like, girl, the only thing you're making a difference in is the stock prices of Kleenex tissues. But okay. When I turned 12, my parents and Caroline decided I was old enough to be kicked out and live with my uncle, because to them I was selfish dead weight that was dragging down the family name. I didn't want them to see me crying, so I waited until they dropped me off and drove me away to cry into my uncle's arms. I was so dizzy from the malnourishment that I was only able to cry for 10 minutes before collapsing to the floor. I could see the look of shock in my uncle's eyes as he examined my extremely pale self, and I ended up just falling asleep, drooling in his lap. I didn't know it at the time, but my uncle was about to make my parents pay. Full story on channel, link below.